Next up, we have David Martens, who is an assistant professor at the University of Antwerp. And this morning I started to really buy into this, that location might matter, and that geo-targeting, there might be some gold in Demdare Hills. So I'm really excited to introduce David, who's actually going to try to tell us how to do it. He is going to talk about geo-targeting for mobile advertising in a privacy-friendly manner.
Hey, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. In this presentation, I'll talk about a new social targeting design that we developed based on consumer location data from mobile devices. And the idea is that this can then be used for targeting in both an effective and privacy-friendly manner. And should you be interested in using this design in practice, I suggest you have a look at Everyscreen Media, which is a startup company that's using this design for mobile advertising. So in this presentation, I'll start with briefly talking about this Geo-Social network design, where we define connections between devices based on the locations that they visit. And we focus on two high-level questions. First of all, are we able to identify different devices belong to the same user within this Geo-Social network? So a bit trying to come up with an initial solution for this one ring to rule them all problem. Secondly, we look at, do these Geo-Social network neighbors also exhibit similar behavior? And explicitly, we're looking at website behaviors. If you're connected, do you also visit the same websites? Previous research has shown that there's tremendous predictive power in social network data. Where the basic idea is, suppose I'm interested in a product. For example, I bought an iPhone, and we're all connected in some social network. Then all of you are likely also interested in that product and so make for a great audience for some marketing campaign. So we try to combine the effectiveness of social network and location data with the explicit need for privacy-friendly design. So in our design, we define connections between mobile devices based on the locations that they visit, where here we're explicitly looking at IP addresses. So logging into a Wi-Fi, logging into a network. As soon as two devices connect to the same location, a connection between them is being created, where we take into account the number of shared locations. So the more locations you share, the stronger the connection between two devices. So we see here 4 devices that potentially visit 3 IP addresses in New York. And the second and the third device share 2 locations, whereas the first and the second device share only 1 location. So the strength between the second and third device is twice as strong. Secondly, we also take into account the popularity of a location, where locations that are not commonly visited, like my home Wi-Fi, define very strong connections, whereas Wi-Fis that are very popular, like public Wi-Fis, these define only weak connections. Important to note is that we're not using any specific characteristics of these locations. So we're not storing the IP address itself, but we're hashing it to some random value. So we're not interested in some street address or the latitude, longitude of those IP addresses. No, we're just using them to define connections between these devices. Similarly, in this design, we're not using any specific characteristics of the devices, so these can be de-identified as well by hashing them to some random number. We just need to make sure that each device ID and each IP is always hashed to the same random number. We define 9 different strength metrics to define this connection, the weight thereof. And the most simple one is simply an unweighted version, where the connection simply indicates whether or not these 2 devices share one location. Did they ever visit the same IP address? We also take into account this popularity factor, where we have a number of weighted versions where we weight by inverse location frequency, which is something similar to inverse document frequency commonly used in text mining. Similarly, with this kind of labeled data, we can try to build a predictive model that says, based on my proximity to this known brand actor or this clicker, what is the probability that I will also click or convert? And you can do that with some linear combination of all these strength metrics, where for a specific campaign, you can build a specific predictive model that yields maximum predictability that a person will click on an ad or convert. Now, with this design, we looked at some real-life mobile location data, where we use mobile check-ins from a real-time bidding environment. So an RTB system is a system where ad impressions are being bid for in real time. So it brings together the publishers of websites, apps that say, well, I have room here for an ad. And on the other side, you have the advertisers that want to advertise online. And whenever a user comes to one of these websites or apps, advertisers can bid to put their ad in real time to that user. And the highest bid, the ad of that advertiser, is being shown on the website or the app. So we use 1 week of real-time bidding data where we listen to 24 websites. So whenever anybody went to any of these 24 websites, we had a log of it in our data set. Now the first question that we're looking at is, are we able to identify the same user on different devices? So we think that the same user on different devices will visit the same locations and therefore is strongly connected to himself within this Geo-Social network. We define 5 methods to see whether 2 devices actually belong to the same user. The first one creates new artificial users by splitting up the locations that they visit across these 2 new users. Now we know that John 1 and John 2 actually are the same user, and now we can see to what extent are these closely connected to one another within the Geo-Social network. The second method is slightly more realistic, and there we do a temporal split up of these location visits, where we say all the visits before the 4th day of the week are assigned to John 1, all the visits after the 4th day are assigned to John 2. Temporal dynamic is similar, but there we're choosing this cutoff point dynamically for each user, such that half of all its location visits are assigned to the first user and half to the second one. The final 2 methods are based on the fact that we sometimes saw email addresses in the URL. And so we assume that some login procedure took place beforehand, and that's why we see an email address within the URL of that website. And then in the final method, we excluded some emails that we think are quite likely just general emails, so that we keep only the personal emails. So first of all, we want to see in what percentage are they just connected to one another. And for all these methods, we see that in the majority of the cases, they are indeed connected to each other. So devices belong to the same users, indeed visit the same locations. So to what extent are devices belong to the same user ranked high across all the network neighbors, according to the strength of this connection? So in both cases, we see quite good results. So we measured this in terms of AUC and also in terms of the rank. And as you would expect, the stronger the strength of the connection, the higher the percentage that devices belong to the same user. And then by fitting a logistic regression model, we can extrapolate these numbers. And then for any connection, for any strength of a connection, we can say what is the probability that these 2 devices belong to the same user. This is very interesting, can be used for retargeting a same user on different devices. Can also be used if you want to distinguish between targeting the same user on different devices versus just targeting similar users. And it's also interesting for true frequency capping, where you don't want that a user sees a certain ad more than, let's say, 5 times a day. Now we can make sure that he doesn't see it more than 5 times a day across all the screens that this user is looking at. Now the second question that we're looking at is, to what extent are Geo-Social network neighbors similar in their behavior? And here we're explicitly looking at visiting websites, browsing behavior. This is a good proxy for brand affinity. Now, how do we go about to see whether this indeed is the case? We first randomly choose a device that visited a certain website, for example, CNN.com. Then for this device, we build the neighborhood around it. And then we look how many of his Geo-Social network neighbors also visit that website. So in this case, we see that 3 out of 6 neighbors also visit the website. That's 50%. If we know that overall in the whole data set, in our complete population, 10% of all users visited CNN.com, then we have a lift of 5. So that's the ratio of these 2 numbers, and the leverage is simply the difference between these 2 numbers. Any lift higher than 1 indicates that Geo-Social network neighbors are more similar to each other than what you would expect by chance. each of these websites, we repeated the procedure that you saw in the previous slide 100 times. So 100 times we took a seed user that visited that website, built a neighborhood, and calculate all these metrics. And what are shown here are the average over these 100 neighborhoods. If we do not consider the complete neighborhood, but only consider the top 10 network neighbors, so the ones that are most strongly connected to this seed user, then we get even higher lifts. And we get lifts from 2.1 up to even 84. So very strong indicators of similarity. Interesting to note is that the social network websites actually yield the highest lifts and leverages. So this seems to indicate that our Geo-Social network really embeds a true social network. So if you're friends in real life, you seem to be linked within this Geo-Social network as well. Now, what are the reasons for this good performance? There are three potential reasons. First of all, our Geo-Social network is able to connect users that are similar. And because they're similar, they will have similar behavior. Secondly, we're able to connect different devices belong to the same user. And probably you will visit the same websites on the different devices, so that's a reason for the good results. Now, what are potential uses of this Geo-Social network and the similarities that are based on it? First of all, of course, targeting ads. Secondly, it can be used for entity resolution, where we're now able to detect whether two devices actually belong to the same user or not. Another potential is cross-channel campaign evaluation. It's likely often the case where an ad shown on one device will lead to a conversion on another. Instead of calculating some success metrics, like click-through rate, conversion rate, on the devices that were targeted, we can now calculate some aggregate metrics on the complete neighborhood of all these targeted devices. Another potential use of this GSN is hyperlocal targeting, where we're now able to target devices in very precise locations without the need to store or know what location it is. The main challenge here is the huge data set that we're working on. Every week about data in the order of terabytes is coming in that we need to store, that we need to aggregate. And definitely if we want to do some scoring of the connections between devices, this is really quite a challenge. So to conclude, our Geo-Social network design allows us to find users on every screen that he or she is looking at. The neighbors are similar in terms of browsing behavior, which seems to be a great proxy for brand affinity. It can be built in a privacy-friendly manner, where we're not using any specific location data. And finally, there are uses beyond targeting, like the cross-channel campaign evaluation. So I thank you for your attention. We've written a full working paper on this. If you're interested in this, feel free to send me an email, and I'll be happy to send you a copy of it. Thank you.
Thank you.